Did that work? Maybe?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Can you see the first slide?
Yes.
Great. Thanks for having me. And if anybody has questions at any time during this, I think this will work well if people just pipe up in the chat and I can answer questions as they go, as they come in. I'm going to talk about the history of MPG and some of the research that we do there. Can you hear me okay? Anybody? Sarah?
Yeah, you sound great.
Great. So MPG is located, the main MPG Ranch is south of Missoula, in between Lolo and Florence, and there's another property, MPG North, that's near Condon. I'm going to focus on MPG Ranch in this talk, and as you drive down the Bitterroot between Lolo and Florence, right now this is what it looks like. It's the area on to the east of the Bitterroot River. As you're driving by, here's another little just reference map, and the ranch is about 16,000 acres. And I'm going to talk about the history of the ranch and some of the things that we think about when we're discussing restoration and how to improve habitat for wildlife. So I'm going to start out talking about the history of the landscape, and because that's important when we're thinking about restoration decisions that and goals. Then I'll talk about the restoration activities and the different response variables that we use to monitor the success of restoration. First thing and this is sort of laid out in terms of things that I think about and things that I really didn't think about much before starting working at MPG in 2009. And one of it seems like it should start at the beginning here. So the ranch lies about halfway below and halfway above the extent of the high water mark of Lake Missoula. And that has a huge effect on the vegetation that grows there and the soils, especially. You can see from an aerial view, I don't know if you can see, can you see my cursor? Tracing
we can see your cursor.
Yeah, so I mean, from an aerial view, you can see the shorelines of Lake Missoula, and below the maximum extent of Lake Missoula, the soils are incredibly different than above the maximum extent. The soils below are mostly outwash from the floods of Lake Missoula, and they're gravelly and drained and droughty. And above, the soils are much older and well-developed, and that has a major effect on what you can get to grow in places. But the main point about that is that and I know most of y'all live below the maximum extent of Lake Missoula too, and it leads to soils that in this picture you can see that what we call soil is really just kind of like a gravel. This is a road cut. You can see the lack of any sort of structure or lack of much structure in the soils. It's a lot of piled up gravel. The next topic that we think about in terms of the history of the land is the records that we have of people's impressions of it. And I'll get back to that. This is going to circle back around to how we think about restoration. And one of the things that I was interesting to me is what were the first accounts of what the land was like. The earliest written records come from Lewis and Clark, who spent time at a lot of time in the Bitterroot, and on their trip there, something that struck me was that there were just a ton of people living in the Bitterroot Valley, and in a lot of the journals, all these journals are available online, and they're pretty interesting to read about the first written accounts of settlers in the area, in the travels of Lewis and Clark across the Great Plains. They were finding their way, and not on like roads, but when they come into the Bitterroot, they're with people the whole time. And there were not just a lot of people there were a lot of horses. And some of the things that Lewis and Clark mentioned about horses surprised me. Just that at various villages that they were visiting, there were huge numbers of horses around, and there's still horses. You can call them feral or wild, but there's been horses at MPG for the earliest settlers recorded there being lots of horses, and there's always been wild horses around, at least since for the last several hundred years. I took a couple slides out of the journals here and just have underlined a few things that I think are important when considering the landscape. First, lots of horses, and then lots of people. In the cultural reconstructions and oral histories, we know that the Salish people were, when they got horses, there was it also increased the amount of cultural exchange between groups of people, and lots and lots of diseases were entering the North American population and reducing the population size and birth rates. So it's surprised me that there were potentially 20 to 60,000 Salish at one time living in the Bitterroot and the Flathead valleys. And they mentioned how many horses there were often, and and that they were traveling along roads from village to village in the Bitterroot, and seemed like good horses. And the Salish were using the horses to travel out to the Great Plains to hunt buffalo, and then bring back the meat for the winter, because the Bitterroot and the Flathead valleys are comparatively mild and a lot less windy than the Great Plains. So when the people when they would be in the Bitterroot Valley, they needed to provide for the horses. So there was a lot of burning to improve or increase the amount of grass on the landscape. The Indians were using fire not just to create grazing, but also for warfare potentially, and the overall effect would be that there would have been a lot of fire on the landscape. I think about the roadkill when I'm driving on Highway 93. It's wonderful up north of Missoula with all of the underpasses and overpasses to help wildlife cross the roads. But with all the human inhabitants of the valley in the 17 and 1800s, there was also a lot of hunting, which would have greatly reduced the wildlife in that area, and potentially that's explains why the Lewis and Clark expedition had trouble even feeding themselves. They ate some horses in the valley and did not didn't think that there was great hunting there. And really, when you take what they wrote about the Bitterroot in total, some of the things they say makes me think that it looked a lot like it does now in some overgrazed rangelands. The landscape that they described, it was stony, bad land, and they were carrying their dog semen through the valley because of the amount of cactus that was growing everywhere. The dog's feet were hurt from the cactus, which tends to increase with overgrazing. And there were the overall picture is that there was intensive grazing before the settlers showed up and continued the increasing grazing, continued the intense grazing. Whitehouse was along on the expedition, and he actually seemed to really enjoy the Bitterroot, but he notes that there wasn't a lot of timber, and the river, or creek as he calls it here, was wide and branched out, as though it, like some of the floodplain forests that we see now might have been a lot less dense due to fires. In considering the restoration work that we're doing at MPG, we thought it was important to put together like a timeline of the cultural history of the land. And these slides, I'm going to kind of zip through them because I want to get to some of the wildlife and restoration stuff. But the human population was high and declined by the time that the white settlers came. And then there were a few really like important landscape effects of settlement. Then the first real settlers white settlers showed up when the Mullen Trail was opened in the 1850s, and the mission in Stevensville at St. Mary's Mission was established. By the time St. Mary's Mission was established and they did a census of the Indian population, there were about 900 Indians living in the valley, which is probably far, far less than the peak. So there could have been a period after Lewis and Clark where the Indian population dwindled, and some of the first settlers' accounts of bountiful, lush land could have been because there was a period there where there wasn't a lot of grazing. But the grazing really got going in the 1870s during the open range period. There was a big demand for meat for to feed the miners in Butte, and so the Bitterroot was also known, it continued to be known as a mild place for the winter, so it was attractive to people coming in. So where MPG is now was homesteaded by the McLean and McClay families, and they used the area for winter range for their livestock, sheep and cows, and then would take the cows over to the Great Plains, and then they would use the Lewis and Clark Pass go take their cattle up the Blackfoot and into the Great Plains and back. And their sheep they would take south into the area around Grangeville, Idaho. and that the estimate is there were about 15,000 sheep at one point that were wintering in the foothills of the Sapphire Mountains. That is likely to have had a major effect on the vegetation that we see now. Sheep, for example, eat most anything except for sagebrush, which increase our particular variety of sagebrush. The mountain big sagebrush is pretty unpalatable to sheep and tends to increase. And so we see big areas where there's a lot of sagebrush, and that is likely to indicate the history of sheep grazing. Then after World War I, there was a pretty major event that affects the landscape that we see now, and that was the dryland wheat farming boom. Wheat was getting over $5 a bushel in 1918, which is more than it gets now sometimes, 100 years later. So everything that was that could be plowed up for wheat farming was plowed up. All the lower elevation, flatter land at MPG and in most of the Bitterroot Valley and the Flathead Valley was at one time was plowed, and that means that there's big areas that were basically transformed from any sort of native vegetation that was there into agricultural fields. And then what would be really interesting, and I'd really like to know, is what happened after, between about 1925 and 1930. We don't really know what exactly was happening on the land. And during the Depression, we know that the McClay family abandoned agricultural operations in the Bitterroot for several years during the Depression because there just wasn't much of a market for anything. And using David McClay's book Blue Distance as a source there, but plants recolonized the area, but potentially not the same ones that had been there before the wheat farming. It was probably pretty weedy. When the beef prices recovered during and after World War II, the McClay family had, by marriage in our area, become the Schrader family, and they started they wanted to improve the rangelands by planting some of the first releases of exotic forage grasses. The main grasses that were planted across the lower elevation flatter lands in the Sapphire foothills were crested wheatgrass and intermediate wheatgrass, and that they really started heavily planting what would have been prairies with the exotic forage grasses in the 50s and continued until the 80s. I'm going to get back to the exotic forage grasses in a minute, but the Schrader Brothers Cattle Company, which was that one family had worked the land that's MPG now from the 1870s up until 2007, and then the ranch was sold to the Sun River Development Company in 2007, and that went under in 2009, and MPG purchased that and began the current mission. So the idea behind the restoration work that we've done is to try and restore native vegetation and to as much of the ranch as we can, and then measure how wildlife responds to that. In this talk, I'm going to focus on how songbirds have responded to some of the work that we've been doing. When we got there in 2009, there were big areas of that had been former wheat fields and were had very simple vegetation communities, mostly crested wheatgrass, and where crested wheatgrass is a pretty good early season forage for cattle, and it's better than having a lot of weeds around. The farmers planted that. You can see in this picture, my wife and I live in this house right here, but this is 2009. Big areas of crested wheatgrass, and where crested wheatgrass wasn't established, you'd have lots of cheatgrass in the flatter areas. And then the ranchers maintained their crested wheatgrass plantations at intermediate with herbicides. So the native forbs were very rare and reduced by the herbicide applications. And in areas that they couldn't drill seed the exotic forage grasses, like in these draws, there'd be weed invasions like from leafy spurge and cheatgrass. And in this draw, you can see a kind of the legacy of aerial herbicide applications, which were used to keep weeds, especially spurge, out of the areas where they would be grazing their cattle in the spring and summer. This is a draw that I'll show a couple more pictures of. And this is Tongue Creek, which is apparently named after the Earl of Tongue, who was a Polish sheep herder who was arrived in the valley early. But you can, this is a draw that has very little shrubby vegetation due to the intense grazing and herbicide applications. And we were lucky enough, we have some old aerial photographs. The earliest ones we have are 1939 and 1940. This is another view of Tongue Creek and Sheep Camp Creek. It doesn't really matter their names, but something to notice, even though by the 1940s, the area had been heavily used by people for centuries, but there hadn't been the aerial herbicide applications. And in this picture, you can see shrubs growing in these draws, and then big fields. And then in this draw, you can also see the shrubby vegetation. So we thought it would be good to try and restore some shrubs. I'm going to come back to that in a minute here. But the landscape had been grazed, plowed, planted, and used for intensive cattle production. And that's the end of the history lesson, folks. If there are anybody wants to comment or bring anything up, happy to take questions. Although I'm not sure I can actually hear anybody if they do have questions.
Yeah, Phil, there is one question, and it's, are there any good resources, books or documentaries that you know of to learn more about Lake Missoula and the ice jam?
There's several. I think I don't have the name of one on the tip of my tongue. I think it's Lake Missoula and the Humongous Floods, or something like that. If you Google it, I'm not sitting by my books right now, but there are, and there's just, I mean, if you Google Lake Missoula, you'll see interesting stuff. But the maximum extent of the lake, the highest it got was 4,200 feet, and if you're if you're out on the in the especially like around plains or Red Sleep Mountain on the Bison Range, there's just, you'll notice if you have a map or altimeter or your tracking device, when you get up above 4,200 feet, the soils will be darker, richer, more developed than they will be down low. Is there anything else on that?
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's the only one so far.
So the next part of this is to talk about kind of our approach to restoration, and something that I guess that when I hear people talk about restoration, I think that like there's maybe some things to clarify and about ecological restoration versus restoration the way that it might be used in common or in other areas of conversation. With this slide shows Daniel by Michelangelo on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and if you follow this, there was an intensive, the Sistine, after Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel, there were several hundred years of mass held in the chapel, and people held candles during mass, and the smoke from the candles wafted up to the ceiling, and over centuries led to basically like smudging of the ceiling. Like the smoke accumulated and the colors became dull. And in artistic restoration, you take something that's, you have a good idea of what the painting was like before, and restoring it as a matter of kind of cleaning the smudges off and repairing it to an original state. And one of the reasons that I showed the slides about Lewis and Clark and the original human history of the area is that there isn't like an original state for the grasslands and habitats in the Flathead and Bitterroot valleys. There were people here, there were people probably camped on the shore of Lake Missoula, woke up one day and it was just an empty lake bed. I feel like after that, the climate has changed. The humans have, made a living off the land for thousands of years. And if we think about like restoration in terms of like, hey, what was it like when Lewis and Clark were here? Let's make it like that. You're likely to miss the mark, because when Lewis and Clark were here, it was one, like recently compared to the amount of time that people have been here, but also we were still coming out of the little ice age. The climate was very different. And the climate will continue to change. It has been changing, will continue to change. If you're trying to like turn back the clock to what a place was like at some previous time, I feel like that approach is better for like a short-term project. Like if somebody drains a wetland and there was a wetland there, restoring the wetland might be a good idea, and you kind of know what that spot, what the desired condition would be there. With the kind of restoration that I'll be talking about, what we're doing, we are free of the need to try and get back to a reference condition, because I don't think that there is a reference site to try and emulate. So when we are talking about ecological restoration, we're talking about trying to restore ecological functions like biomass, or like the productivity of the land, like how much biomass it produces for ungulates, or how much grass cover there is for ground nesting birds. That's where we can get to some measurable outcome rather than focusing on trying to get, go back to a previous time. So the goal, this is a slide looking out over the North floodplain at MPG. And when I think it's a pretty picture, but the more you think about the picture, the more like touching, like the more you can see the human touch. The Ponderosa Forest has been maintained is there because of frequent fires in the past. You can see this is a stand of crested and intermediate wheatgrass, and you can see these are actually dead bitterbrush plants that got sprayed, surrounded by cheatgrass. And what our goal was for when we started the restoration process here was to facilitate the natural recuperative processes that the land would do anyhow. That would be like passive management rather than actually doing stuff where we could, and where there were big expanses of very simple plant communities, we wanted to replace those plant communities with native prairies. And in the draws and riparian areas, we wanted to increase the shrub cover. And then we wanted to measure what we would be, how wildlife would respond to that. It's part of our initial plans to measure the response of wildlife to restoration, but I was just working on a paper with a colleague, Dean Pearson at and he pointed out that that's not actually often done. There's an assumption a lot of the time that if you restore the habitat, that the wildlife will benefit from it. And that's what Dean referred to it as like the field of dreams approach, where if you build it, they will come. And it seems reasonable. And I think a lot of the time that it works pretty well, but it's not always measured. It's sort of assumed that if you get the habitat right, the wildlife will respond. But when you make if you make that assumption, you're also assuming that like you can see what, your ability to look at habitat is, you kind of think that you can see what a bird sees, and maybe you can, but it's worth thinking about that and measuring that, I think. So there's another slide of the Bitterroot. I kind of talked over this slide a little bit, but I'm going to move on from here to some of the activities that we do to try and restore the ecosystem functions here. So I'm going to move to the next. Did I get? Oh yeah. Some things are pretty straightforward. In 2009, on one of the center pivot fields, there were one evening I counted 252 deer, and that was just a ton of deer. And you could see, even though the cattle, there hadn't been cattle since 2007. In 2009, you see a browse line on the riparian vegetation and tons of deer. We started public hunting program immediately and set up exclosures around some of the aspen and cottonwood groves that we wanted to protect. This slide, we planted lots of shrubby vegetation and bunch grasses in areas that were this is an area that was used as a feed lot. It's very difficult to get anything to grow, and we worked on restoring wetland vegetation around wetlands. And we, in places where there wasn't remnant vegetation, where spraying had been used to kill off the weeds, but it also killed off the shrubs, we transplanted aspens or planted, and we work a lot with Mark Vandermeer's restoration company, Van Wild, and they do a lot of the planting for us. And we plant, and we end up planting about 10,000 trees and shrubs a year. It really helps it's less now, actually. We've been fairly successful at keeping the deer and elk populations down. I'll get to that in a minute, hopefully. And we found that if you don't protect a tree or a shrub with some sort of exclosure, it would pretty rapidly get eaten up by a deer. And then, although I've mentioned that how herbicides simplified the vegetation community as an MPG, there's also a lot of weeds that we didn't want. I have this slide in here more as like a note about herbicide applications, and that we use herbicides in a lot of situations that we use them carefully, and we use them in the lowest doses that we think we can get away with. And then one of the things that I feel like has been a major influence on the vegetation at the ranch and the response of birds especially, it has been our public hunting program. We kill 20 to 60 elk a year, and 10 to 20 deer a year now, but we used to harvest a lot more there. We kind of managed to get ahead of the whitetail population, and I love whitetail deer, don't get me wrong, but I like watching them and whatever, but I don't like seeing so many around that I see a browse line on the vegetation. So we've tried to keep the animal numbers, ungulate numbers, in line with what we think the habitat can support. So we have a public hunting program where during the archery season, hunters can sign up for different units at the ranch, and then we escort lots of hunters out for cow elk hunts. And then one of the main things that has affected the draws and you might call them gullies or ravines or whatever, is the spraying and burning takes out the wood and that would normally be there from fallen trees and shrubs. And when water during runoff events, water flows very rapidly, and that can increase erosion rates. So we've used tons of salvage wood. We go to logging operations and ask first, but get permission to take wood out of the salvage out of the piles that would be burned, and then we put them into the areas where there's erosion and lack of ground cover. We do a lot of restoration work, and this is a habitat tracking website that is curated by Dan Mummy and Chuck Casper, and they have if you Google habitat restoration map MPG, you'll get to this site, and every different areas are outlined on the habitat restoration map, and then you can see our the description of that environment, what we've done there, and then you can look at aerial. Keep pointing with my finger at the screen, which isn't very helpful, but you can look and see what, from aerial imagery, what areas looked like in 2011 to 2020. And then over here you can read about whatever actions we're doing. If you're thinking about seeding or spraying or any sort of habitat management activities, we hope that this map will be a resource for the things that we've done. If you go through the updates and action reports, they're frank. Like, not everything we do works very well. We try lots of stuff that doesn't work. So I feel like it's good to share successes as well as failures. And so this is provides a record of what we've done in every part of the ranch. So gonna just mention, this is a picture of a shrubby draw in 2013 smoky image early on in restoration work. In the shrubby draws, we would fence, plant, spot spray leafy spurge, and try and get the unstable eroding banks stabilized, and then to grow shrubby vegetation. Next, we're going to move to some of the wildlife responses and how we monitor this. What we did was establish 570 points, and each point is separated from other points by 250 meters. And these are long-term monitoring points. But in 2011, we did an intensive vegetation survey at 2011, 2012. We went to each point and laid out a tape for 50 feet in 4 directions from the point, recorded at each foot the plant that was at that spot. And then at each of these points also, I'll show a picture of these folks. Actually, I'll just skip to it. This is our long-term monitoring slide, but this is Kate Stone, Eric Rasmussen, and Debbie Like. And they go to each of those points, not each point every year, but in some years they visit the points regularly, and they do songbird point counts. And a songbird point count is one of these, either Kate and sometimes we have like Deborah Gosling who worked for the Lee Metcalf Wildlife Refuge, and several other people will help with the point counts. But the skill set here is that each of these people can identify every bird in Montana by its song or its call. And they stand at a point and record each bird that they hear or see, and the distance from the point to the bird and the habitat that the bird's in. And they'll go to the points that they're going to monitor for the year twice during the songbird breeding season. And that's how we measure or know which birds are at what points. And then by doing that every year for the last 10 years, we can look at changes in the bird populations. We also measure other long-term variables like the biomass production, which is done with a clip plot, where you lay a small quarter meter square frame on the ground and clip the vegetation in it, dry it, and weigh it. We do aerial counts of deer, elk, and horses, and then we look at how those variables change in response to changes in vegetation. There's Kate. She leads the bird research at UM. And we work with UM Bird Ecology Lab and that was with Megan Filing and Anna Nosen there, and several other folks. I don't want to leave anybody out, but it's a long list. Here, this is a map of this created from the bird point counts in the vegetation survey. And it shows the proportion of exotic plants, which is in the red areas here are exotic forage grass plantations. And then where the warmer the color, the more exotic plants there are. And then in the this side is bird species richness at these points or across the landscape. And if you kind of squint, you can see that the floodplain, tons of birds, pretty good habitat. The exotic forage areas were like bird deserts, and then upland areas with better soils, forests have more birds to start with. These are the warmer colors up here have been logged, but not as heavily grazed for as long a period. And they're also wetter, so it's more productive habitat. These are just a couple of our strategy is based off the monitoring points. We would want to focus our weed control efforts on places where we are indicated where there's lots of weeds, and where there's a lot of weeds, we would be more aggressive with our like herbicide applications. We wouldn't go and spray an area that had very much native vegetation, but if an area is indicated to have mostly exotic weeds, we would probably spray and replant that area. And then here's a couple of pictures of birds of interest to us, grasshopper sparrows, and we use the monitoring to make maps of where they are, where the warmer colors indicate more of that species. Same with brewer sparrow, which is a sage obligate. I have that in there. We could come back to brewer sparrow and sagebrush, but there's a lot of sage, probably due to the sheep grazing, but there's some pretty cool birds that use sage. So we want to make sure that we don't hurt the habitat for birds of interest like brewer sparrow. And then spotted towhee is a real shrub obligate. It forages on the ground around shrubs for insects mostly. And this is a 2011 map, and like, well, if we revegetate these draws, will we see the spotted towhees expand their ranges down some of the areas that have had the vegetation drastically changed by previous management. So I'm going to show a couple of slides that show the restoration activities through repeat photography. This would be, you can see some of that'd be wood. It was Jeff Clark, who's a field crew manager here in the photo with the wood, and this would be where he had been depositing wood, and then we planted trees and shrubs in this draw. This is what it looked like in 2010, excuse me. I even brought can you see my face, anybody? I don't know. I brought a non-alcoholic beer along in the spirit of a pub talk. This is a draw called Partridge Valley in 2010. and then we planted a lot of stuff in it, 2012. And then 2018, trees are taking off and shrubby cover. We ended up putting a fence around this area to keep deer out of it. And oh, sorry. And so we would want to know from our point counts how birds responded to that. And I'm going to get to that after this next set of reference photos. Here, this is had a little wetter site. And the next slide shows, this is downhill. It's the same drainage as the previous, but a lot less water. And in this kind of area, 2011, it takes a long time for plants to really get established and grow. This is zoomed in of part of the previous slide. And even though we planted it in 2010, by 2016, when I get to some data slides in a minute, not much had really, it hadn't really grown a lot. But so after, if you're doing restoration plantings at your place, the message here is that it takes longer than you might want, but it happens. Usually trees and shrubs will need water for 3 or 4 years to establish in dry, well-drained soils. And then after they get well, well established, deep rooted, they start to grow a lot faster. And I put this slide just to show the same spot 5 years after planting, and then after 5 years, it starts to grow a lot faster. And this is from this summer. So you see the trees and shrubs are really taking off. This would be, sorry, I'm going back. I was going to mention, so that in the 2011, the birds that you would see there would be a lot of grassland birds like western meadowlarks, Vesper sparrows, flyovers, tree swallows, and not a lot of shrub nesting birds. But over time, the plantings attract lots more species and more birds. So we start to see birds like goldfinches and Brewer's blackbirds, Bullock's oriole, species that are more associated with shrubby vegetation start to show up after about 8 years here. I put this in just to kind of break things up. Does anybody know that bird? I don't know if you can know it or not. I thought it would be interesting to have some slides of birds for identification, but it can't exactly. Oh, maybe there is a Q&A here.
Someone from the brewery says it's Bob.
Is Bob?
Yeah, I'm not sure what that means.
I'm not sure what that means either. Oh, I see. Sorry, I had the question thing up.
Yeah, no worries. Actually, we were, to be mindful of everyone's time, we were thinking that in the next 5 minutes, we could move on to questions. So if you have any wrap up that you would like to do.
Okay. I'll skip ahead a bit. And get to some actual data. This would be these are some slides of songbird abundance and songbird species richness. So at these points, these are areas that were where we did not plant any new shrubs, but there had remnant vegetation. We wanted to compare like what was happening in areas where there was remnant shrubs and shrubby draws to areas that that we had planted a lot of stuff. And the passive approach is weed control, rest from grazing, and ungulate population control, just those things tend to have increased the shrub cover and the number of birds in the areas. And then comparatively, and this shows the shrubbery draws like the Partridge Valley or slide, that series of slides where I showed where we planted a lot of stuff would be actively managed where we've planted. And you see the top two panels here are just the number of birds at those spots. We're seeing increases, and in the areas that are in pretty good shape, and in the areas that were in really bad shape, after a period of several years, we start to see an increase in the bird use of those habitats, and that it looks like we're hopefully approaching the where there are similar numbers. I wanted to talk. This is one of the crescent wheatgrass fields that we were restoring native prairie to. It was led by Dan Mummy, and the approach here was to kill the crescent wheatgrass using herbicides and then replant it. This shows like in 2016, it's a lot of weeds, but by 2018, lots of native plants had started to get established that we had drill seeded. These are the bird monitoring points, and the points are on the map here. And at these points, the slide just shows the response of songbird abundance and richness to restoration. We're seeing some good trends starting to show up in the restoration areas. Maybe I'll just cut it there so we have time to, I have some more stuff, but if there's questions out there, I'd rather take those. It might be more.
Awesome. Yeah. First I wanted to say thank you so much. It was really interesting to learn about the history of the ranch, and as well as all the restoration that you guys are doing. You did get a comment from Deb Kemp. She says, I hope you're enjoying your non-alcoholic beer as much as I'm enjoying your talk. Thank you for your work. And then Thanks. We did have several questions. So the first question was, how do you determine what to focus on when working to restore an ecosystem?
How do you determine what to focus on when restoring an ecosystem?
What to focus on first when restoring it?
If I'm consulting with somebody who's thinking about starting a restoration project, my goal is to figure out what the owner wants. Like, if we've been, this activities have to focus on like how to get the most out of your property really would be the thing that I would focus on. If somebody wants to have a bird preserve, you're going to make different decisions than if you want to have a trophy elk and mule deer running around. I'd say probably it's easier to have trophy elk and mule deer than diverse native prairie supporting huge abundances and richness of songbirds. But the thing that I would always focus on would be like just getting really clear on what's desired, rather than, I mean, if you ask 5 different landowners what they want the most, it's going to be different things. So I think that setting goals is really depends on what people want out of their place.
Absolutely. Awesome. The next question is, did you find it odd that the grasshopper sparrow appeared only in exotic plant areas that overall had less birds? Why monitor for the grasshopper sparrow?
Well, other than that, they really have a cool call and we like them. The grasshopper sparrows, since they're, for anyone who isn't familiar with this bird, like if you come across a grasshopper sparrow in a grassland, a lot of the time you might think it's like a mouse scurrying away from your feet. Like they're they need, they have particular habitat requirements. And as a monitoring species, I've got to, actually it was timely because I have this slide too. Like we didn't want to, this is a long-billed curlew, and it's like there were lots of curlews on the ranch when we started. They like short grass. Grasshopper sparrows also. We didn't want to like lose some of the birds that were there. We wanted to kind of think about all the different kinds of habitats that birds that were there were using. Like we didn't want to go burn down all the sage and replace it with what might be more, quote, natural habitat because we'd lose probably the brewer sparrows. So we have some areas that we're managing for shortgrass prairie species and keeping trying to have a mosaic of different habitats to provide for as many species as possible.
Cool. Yeah, the next several questions actually were asking about what songbird that was that you had shown on the screen.
Oh, the one that somebody called Bob?
Yes.
That was a Say's phoebe.
A Say's phoebe. Awesome. Yeah, we had, I think, 4 people ask about that one.
They're the best bird.
Yeah.
Because they show up in February from their migration. And once one just got to our house yesterday or a couple days ago. And once the Say's, and they have a really pretty little phoebe call. And once they're here, you know that winter is on its last legs. It's going to lose. And they're here now, even though it still might seem like winter. The phoebes are back.
And say that, can you say that name one more time? We had a request.
Phoebe?
The phoebe.
It's Say's phoebe, S-A-Y' phoebe.
Awesome. Let's see. Someone from the brewery asked, do you only monitor at all of those site points in that area only?
The groups, we also do like migration counts of raptors. That's by the Raptor View Research Institute. There are people come and count flying, like migrating raptors that Bird Ecology Lab, they do songbird mist netting in the floodplain. And they use that to track long-term changes in songbird abundance in response to habitat there. So there's a few different monitoring programs that I didn't cover.
Okay, cool. Let's see. What part of Lake County is Partridge Valley in?
I don't know.
Okay.
We're in Missoula County.
Okay.
South Missoula County.
Let's see. We can look that one up and we will figure that one out. Are you actively trying to restore the exotic plant / invasive areas?
Yes, we do that. If you go to the MPG website, the habitat management map tracking site, you will see the different approaches that we use in different areas.
Cool. Okay. And then I have just 3 more questions from you or for you. Have you tried utilizing wetlands for farming runoff and or wastewater treatment and tracked the results of nutrient removal?
We have not. The wetland, the main wetland we have here used to be a sporting clays range, and it was contaminated with lead. So we excavated that and have tried to establish aquatic vegetation and wetland vegetation there.
Okay, awesome. Beth wants to know if you guys have volunteer opportunities with the ranch.
Yeah, always have opportunities for tours or volunteer, like fence poles and that kind of stuff. To get in touch with us, you just write an email at info@mpgranch.com.
Awesome. And then the last question, someone was asking about napweed and if you guys have experience in removal or control of napweed.
We have a lot of napweed. With the rancher, Bob Schrader, who lived here before and still lives nearby and is a good friend, he released every biocontrol insect for every weed that was possible to release. I think we have every biocontrol insect out there. The napweed, I think it helps. It's hard to say. The root weevils seem to weaken the plants a lot. Napweed's tough, and it sort of is, where it's in areas of mostly native vegetation, we pretty much just use the biocontrols rather than try to spray it, because our experience is that most of the time with napweed, if you spray it really hard with something, some other weed will grow there rather than some native plant.
Awesome, cool.
I don't have any good solutions on napweed. That's a nasty one.
It is, it's a hard one. Awesome, well, that's all the questions that I have for you, but I just want to thank you again so much for your time and all of your information. And to those of you asking if this was recorded, it was recorded. It will be posted on our Facebook page. And thank you guys that joined us on Facebook and on Zoom and at the brewery. Be sure to tune in next month on the 31st of March for our speaker about wolves. And thank you so much again, Philip, and we'll be signing off.
Thanks, Sarah. Bye, folks.